Through the Mind's Eye, Ralph M. Lewis, Chapter 15, What is Mystical Enlightenment? The word enlightenment commonly alludes to a symbolic goal for intellectual advancement. The association of the word light with knowledge and understanding goes back to man's earliest observations. Our common visual experience depends upon light. Our sense of sight is the greatest of all our receptor senses as it reveals more of the external world to us. Therefore, light is sight's agent. Knowledge is primarily what we perceive. Light, therefore, symbolically depicts that which can be perceived and known. Darkness, the opposite of light, also differs from it symbolically. This difference is likewise associated with the early human experience. Where there is darkness, there is obscurity and concealment. What could not be seen was therefore the unknown. The unknown has always had a dual effect upon man. On the one hand, it challenges him to penetrate its veil. Man sought to discover what may lie hidden there. On the other hand, the unknown and the mental darkness which it causes engender fear. When we have the knowledge of something, we then have the chance of coping with it. We can either master it or, if necessary, defend ourselves against it. The unknown can also suggest danger, the threat of the uncontrollable. It can become the substance out of which the imagination builds fearful distortions. True enlightenment is more than perceiving. In other words, it is more than knowing that something is. For something to be actually known to us, we must know what and why it is. Simply, to truly know something is to relate it to ourselves. It must have meaning to us, and it must fit into the comprehensive plan of our life, or what we call nature. Enlightenment, then, means understanding. Understanding, which is attained through empiricism, that is, through objectivity, is limited. Much in life escapes our attention. Further, not all that we experience is understood by us. It may be that we have neither the time nor the mental capacity to analyze each thing we experience as to its nature and function. Consequently, life consists of a series of hiatuses, that is, gaps of the unknown to all of us. It's like walking a lane of alternating light and impenetrable darkness. For this reason, it's difficult to establish a philosophy of life that is self-assuring. We're often caused to feel isolated, lost in a worldly sea of uncertainties. This is the reason why so many persons resort to prophecy. They want to know what the unknown may reveal. They wish to alter their lives according to what may be revealed. Yet, whatever may be predicted from such prophecies often leaves a lingering doubt as to its accuracy. For peace of mind in life, there must be a chain of continuity. Nothing should seem to stand completely apart from man, and conversely, man apart from it. Simply, such diverse things as the cosmos, life, death, past, present, and future should fall into a harmonious order of personal understanding to us. They should not remain distant mysteries. However, the intelligence alone cannot provide a uniting of such mysteries and understanding. How, then, is perfect understanding or enlightenment to be attained? It is the mystic who can experience this true enlightenment. He does this by transcending the finite and embracing the infinite. It must be realized that there is not actually a finite world of which we speak as a distinctive thing in itself. The so-called finite world constitutes the limits of man's objective senses, being that part of the infinite about which man's senses and their limitations have constructed a mental wall. But the consciousness which mystics can attain is possible of penetrating this wall. It is then that man experiences the infinite as one. A mystic philosopher once said, "Mystical experience of the real is like a vast, formless reservoir of life-giving substance." The revelation that man has of the infinite, the special enlightenment he experiences, is called illumination. With such illumination, the mystery of being is revealed to man. He sees inwardly the divine existing in all things. He sees not just particulars or separateness of objects, but rather experiences the essence of which all consists. This illumination consists of 3 stages. The first is the awakening of the self to the divine. This means man's realization that he is not just bound to the body. In other words, that the self can experience pleasure, states of awareness that are far beyond those provided by the appetites and passions. For analogy, if man were to continually look at his reflection in a mirror, it would seem to him to be his only self. Yet, when he turns away from the mirror and closes his eyes, he then awakens to the reality of another self. It is the one that is sensed from within. The second stage of illumination is the realization of the variations of the nature of the self. Actually, what we call self consists of unseparated states of consciousness. These are the physical, the mental, and the ecstatic. The last is the sublime pleasure that seems to have an immaterial cause or nature. In this second stage, the mystic realizes how he formerly was restricting, though unwittingly, his potential growth of self-awareness. The final stage of illumination goes beyond the realization that there is an absolute reality. The mystic now feels that he is actually immersed in this one. He experiences a mystical unity. This is realized as being of all things and all things being of you. The mystic learns it is not necessary to oscillate, to alternate his consciousness back and forth through various stages. He can at will attain ultimate illumination or cosmic consciousness. However, this is only possible when the mystic has perfected the technique of the 3 stages briefly touched upon here. Illumination is a transition from bodily knowledge, the strictly intellectual, to psychic knowledge. The mystic gradually transforms many of the former unknowns into personal understanding. However, the aspirant must learn that purgation and illumination are related. In other words, the mystic must purge himself of that which his conscience tells him is unworthy. We have said that the consciousness of mystics can penetrate the wall of the finite. This implies that consciousness can go beyond the limits of which we are ordinarily aware. Is this simply fantasy? Let us now consider this related subject, a deeper penetration into the phenomena of consciousness. Is consciousness body-bound? Is it confined entirely within the physical organism, or can it reach out infinitely beyond the self? Further, is consciousness a thing, a substance, an attribute, or a function? Consciousness has an indirect reality to us. We do not know it in itself. It has no quality such as the things we perceive with our receptor senses. In other words, consciousness has no space, dimension, weight, color, scent, or sound. We may think of consciousness as sensation, yet we cannot identify any sensation as singularly being consciousness. Down through the centuries, the search for the nature of consciousness has been elusive. But the phenomenon being sought was not always known by that name. Epicurus, a Greek philosopher, 341 to 270 BC, said, "Where we are, death is not yet, and where death comes, there we are not." Substitute the word "we" for self-consciousness, and you have man's realization that the reality of himself and of the external world depends upon an intangible, innate quality. To several intangible phenomena, man has given a more or less common relationship as soul, mind, and self. If they were not all accepted as one, then it was believed that one of them was the fundamental cause of the others. The French philosopher René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, said that soul, body, and mind were separate, but that they interacted upon each other. The point of interaction was the pineal gland. The soul enters and influences the mechanical action of the body. Descartes said that the soul then moves the body and consciousness is a result. Descartes further stated that though consciousness is in the body, it nevertheless occupies no space within it. He called consciousness an unextended substance. In other words, that consciousness was not measurable. It had no physical nature. Consciousness as a phenomenon was being realized, but could not be separately identified. As noted in the work entitled Unconsciousness by James A. Miller, we find today a large group of psychologists who insist that consciousness and the unconscious process may be interpreted in terms of the operation of the nervous system. One general statement is that the cerebral cortex controls consciousness, and the thalamus, a mass of gray matter at the base of the brain, mediates the unconscious process. By unconscious process is meant the unlearned or inherited process. Thus, psychology generally considers consciousness an attribute of a complex technical mechanical process. There is, however, no agreement on the details of this process, but there is the unconscious, to which they refer as the unlearned and inherited process. Is consciousness then entirely a function derived from the organic activity of living matter? Simple unicellular organisms exhibit a consciousness of their fundamental life activity. This awareness of the simple cell as to what is necessary for its continued existence is apparently unlearned. This consciousness is evident in the cell with the beginning of its life activity and not something acquired later. If this is so, it would seem to attribute to consciousness an intelligence, a oneness, that is, having a single state. In other words, the intelligence in the simple cell has an awareness, a consciousness of itself, or that consciousness has its own innate intelligence. More simply, this intelligence in the simple cell does not have to be aroused by any stimulation. It knows itself, that is, the intelligence and consciousness being as one. This abstract rationalization implies that consciousness is not wholly a mechanical effect of the life process in matter. Rather, it would appear that consciousness is an integral part of that energy which infuses inanimate matter and brings forth life. Can we deduce from this that all the phenomena of the cosmos have a consciousness of their own particular nature? So far as man's observations and speculations have determined, change underlies all manifestations of the cosmos. Everything is becoming, nothing is. There is a concatenation of cause and effects, yet this chain also goes through changes, each effect becoming in turn a cause in relation to other effects. Is then this cosmic function of change a consciousness of its own necessity? Since the cosmos, or being, has to be, there being no alternative state, is this persistence of its nature a self-awareness, a consciousness? To assume this is to conceive that there is a universal consciousness pervading all things, both animate and inanimate. We must think, then, of this universal consciousness as being binary, that is, dual in its basic function, one phase of its nature interacting upon another. In a complex living organism, the universal consciousness establishes centers having a lower consciousness as that of the nervous system and brain. In this way, living forms become a microcosm, a little cosmos in themselves. They, too, have the conscious impulse to be, as does the cosmos as a whole. There is then a psychic bridge, a nexus between every living thing and the cosmos. Even though we have said that the universal consciousness is binary, dual in its activity in living organisms throughout the cosmos, it may still have functions that are more expansive levels of itself. Let us use an example to clarify this point. Let us think of the universal consciousness of the cosmos as rungs of a ladder, each ascending rung being a greater apperception of itself. One of these rungs or levels of the universal consciousness is, as said, of the nervous system and cells of living matter. But there lie beyond or above that, relatively speaking, a myriad of other levels of consciousness which are indwelling in all life forms. Man then has within himself the potential of ascending these other rungs, reaching these other more expanded levels of consciousness. If he does, the greater then will be his insight of cosmic reality. This greater reality that is experienced is amorphous. It has none of the qualities of our objective perceptions. Such a state of consciousness directly experienced is unlike the other phases of consciousness of which we are normally aware. The sensations of these more expansive levels of consciousness, however, do have a harmonic relationship with our objective sense perceptions. Consequently, one will commonly interpret these exalted states of the universal consciousness in terms of dimensions, colors, substance, sounds, and tactile sensations. Such psychic contacts of the cosmos, however, are unrealistic as to the mental images which are attributed to them. Their only realism is the experience itself. The objective image aspect is only symbolic. It does, however, have value in aiding people engaged in meditation and visualization to attain once again the same levels of exalted consciousness by preliminary focusing upon the symbol. This symbol that is experienced may also serve as an intellectual stimulus. It can result by suggestion in a surge of inspiration, an influx of new ideas, of practicability, and greater clarity of thought. Not only do human minds have the potential of probing into the depths of other levels of the universal consciousness pervading their beings, but they also have, by means of this connection, access to all other minds of equal sensitivity. The technique of projecting one's consciousness beyond the limits of the receptor's senses and beyond one's self-awareness is relatively simple to explain in theory. In practice, it is far more complex. As stated, man has two general states of consciousness. First, the universal consciousness with its myriad and mostly unknown expanded levels. And secondly, our commonly experienced states of consciousness, the objective and subjective. It is then obviously necessary to have our realization or awareness transcend the relatively lower stage of consciousness to attain the more expanded levels. The first step is to attempt to suppress all external stimuli. This is the withdrawing of consciousness from the impressions of the sense faculties. Mystically, it is termed entering the silence. Not to see, hear, taste, or smell is no easy accomplishment. Introverting the consciousness, turning it inward to the subjective functions of mind, aids in a release from the objective state. But it is only a transference of consciousness to mental images or memory impressions and the processes of imagination, visualization, and reason. The second step in the procedure is to visualize a single idea. This can be either a place or a person. You wish to actualize your consciousness, that is, you want to experience self as being at that place or with that person that you are visualizing. By this we mean that no other impressions are in consciousness except that to which consciousness has projected. Your present surroundings, where you are, must vanish. It is as if physically you are not where you are located, but rather where you have projected. The third step is to cause the image you are visualizing, the person or place, to finally dissolve into a dark spot. You then focus your whole attention upon the spot until it too seems to pass. If successful, you will begin to experience the phenomenon of another level of the hierarchy of the universal consciousness. Those who have experienced this phenomenon have stated there is a transition in the nature of the self. The I am continues to exist. That is, you are, but without any substance or particular characteristics. It is a state of consciousness that is almost inexplicable. Simply, there is no visualization of yourself. The next step in the phenomenon of projection of consciousness is the realization that you are now only aware of that person or place which you sought to experience. Any analogy offered to explain it is, of course, not adequate. However, we will suggest one version as a help. That is, viewing a motion picture or television screen. In doing so, you see what is occurring on the screen. You hear and see what is transpiring. However, there is this difference. You are not separate from what you experience in the projection of consciousness. You are actually in it. You are not seen as a form, but rather just as a sense of being present, as though you were invisibly in the scene being observed. It is a kind of detached consciousness. When we close our eyes and shut out all physical impressions of the outer self, we nevertheless do not lose the consciousness of knowing that we are. We do not lose the consciousness of self. It is that kind of consciousness which we have in the projection of consciousness. During such an experience, there is, of course, no realization of either time or space. When the transference of this state of consciousness is made, it is devoid of a time factor. When one returns to the objective state, to normalcy, it may seem that the time lapse has been considerable, but it has not been. It is like a dream. The event may seem to have taken minutes or hours in what was experienced, but the actual lapse of time may be merely seconds. The consciousness in these higher levels may reach that state where all attempts at mental images to try defining it are impossible. There would be no elements by which one can make an objective comparison. It is, as the mystics have said, an ineffable ecstasy, that is, a sublime state of euphoria, of well-being, of peace profound. Many of the so-called miracles related in the various sacred books were actually the journeys of the consciousness of self outward bound. It must be stated that each of the steps herein related is far more complex than is being given. It requires a careful study of a rational presentation of the subject matter. Projection of consciousness is one of the subjects extensively dealt with in the Rosicrucian teachings, both psychologically and in accordance with authentic mystical precepts.